Hello and welcome back to our EdSurge Live Thought Leader interview series. We're joined this half hour by Courtney Brown, Vice President for Strategic Impact at the Lumina Foundation. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And just to remind folks, if this is the first interview you're tuning in for of our series, we do have time. We'll leave time for questions, so be thinking of some. If you want to raise your hand by clicking the hand icon, and we're here at sunny San Diego at the ASU GSB Summit. And thanks for taking time out. So I wanted to talk micro-credentials, which I know is something Lumina has been really involved in supporting and thinking about. So I guess I wanted to start off with actually kind of a question about what the big idea behind that is. You know, why look at credentials? And sorry, I said micro-credentials, but credentials of all kinds, really. But new types of thinking about credentials in new ways, and why that, and what's the vision behind this?
Great. Well, let me take us back a little bit to get to that question.
Sure.
To that answer. So Lumina Foundation is the largest foundation in the U.S. focused specifically on post-secondary education. That's anything beyond high school. And a number of years ago, we set a goal for the nation that by 2025, 60% of Americans will hold a high-quality certificate, degree, or other high-quality credential. Up until a couple years ago, we only counted degrees because it was the only thing that we could count. Not that we don't think other things are not high-quality credentials, but we have a data issue, so we could only count degrees. A couple years ago, we added certificates. We found that there was a way to count certificates through a nationally representative sample. So we added certificates. We want to count other credentials, and we'll get to micro-credentials in a minute, because we do believe other credentials are high quality. And when we talk about high quality, a high quality credential has transparent learning outcomes that lead to further education and employment. And the reason we set this goal for the nation is that we believe we need better and more talent in the U.S. To have a better society, or compete economically, compete globally, whatever it may be. Currently as a nation, we're at about 42% degrees. When we add certificates, we're roughly at about 47%. We're nowhere near where the nation needs to be with regards to the talent. We estimate about 60%, 65% of jobs in 2025 will require some form of post-secondary education. So we hope to count certifications and licenses, apprenticeships, whatnot, as soon as we can have a nationally representative sample to be able to count those, and so they meet our definition of high quality. We don't want to stand behind any credential that is going to lead to a dead end for an individual. So they can't get a job. They can't get further education from that. So we want to make sure these are high quality credentials. So everything we do is about supporting education so that Americans have what they need to be able to have a good job and good lives in the future.
And how do you tell the high quality ones, right? Because I think I see somewhere that you guys talk about a GPS for credentials, right? Because there's, with all these various options, especially when you start talking about certification or certificates, like,
right.
How do you sort through that?
So we look big picture. We look more at the system level. And so degrees on average in the aggregate have a much higher outcome, about $1 million person over the course of a lifetime, than without a degree. And so in the aggregate, they lead to jobs. When the recession hit, most people that had a degree did not lose their job or quickly found another job. It's those people that did not have a credential that suffered the most in a recession. And they couldn't get another job. They had nothing to go get further education with. And so those are the people that suffer the most. And so those in the aggregate degrees generally provide that. When we added certificates, we wanted a 20% premium over high school. So in the aggregate, certificates provide that. And certificates also lead to further education because most of them are provided at a post-secondary, a 2-year technical institution. And so they're credit bearing and then could lead to further education. Certifications don't do that. They almost live in a black box and other types of credentials. And so until we can unpack that and make them more transparent so that the learner understands what they're getting, the employer understands, providers understand, we want to make sure that those are high quality. So we're working to unpack that box a bit.
And are you seeing, I think you guys you're looking at tracking sort of credentials, or the number of credentials people are getting going up, or do you sense that there is movement in this area? Or because it seems like one of your goals is to have more people get credentials.
Right. So we count our goal as the first credential.
Okay.
So 60% is that first credential. But the reality is the future of work which is a big topic these days.
For sure.
Future work is demanding this lifelong learning. So it's no longer sufficient to learn from 5 years old until 21 and then have a job until 65 and then retire. The current, really not even the future work, the current state of work requires lifelong learning. So you don't end at 21, you may get a degree or certificate at age 20, and then at age 25, you need a certification on top of that. And then maybe you go get it back and get a degree, or times are changing and you need a different type of certificate. So this is an ongoing process. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of people have almost like a deck of credentials, and they're trying to figure out the best way to use those credentials. And I imagine that in the future we'll see much more of that learning will just be a continuous process, whether it's through a provider, an employer, a community service, something like that.
And so, I know one of the things that you guys are sort of supporting with your grants and programs, several innovative sort of ideas. And I know that some edX MicroMasters, I mentioned microdegrees earlier, are one of those things, like the idea of having these kind of, not just the MOOCs, which, people talked about in a lot of our interviews of the last couple of days of the mixed results of just pure having some free online course, but moving beyond that and saying, here's some credit of some kind for a short form online course that's low cost. And so is that something that you're looking to do more of as you guys expand your support for programs? And do you see other things beyond what you're even supporting? Do you see micro-credentials growing?
Absolutely. It's absolutely something we are looking and exploring. We have supported edX. edX works globally, and we're trying to understand what the value of those credentials are. A lot of what edX and these MicroMasters, micro-credentials are on top of a degree. So most people that get a MicroMasters have a bachelor's degree. Not everybody. There are some people that go and get a MicroMasters without a degree. But they tend to be a top-off, not a beginning. We're trying to explore, could they be that first credential? So could an adult get a MicroMasters as their first credential to give them that first rung on the ladder and then take that and build on it? Or maybe that's sufficient for what they need, but then they can still use that learning and apply it to other learning. So we're really trying to unpack that. One of my concerns about some of these micro-credentials, if we can talk about concerns for a second, is many of them are for the elite already, the privileged. I already have education and I'm in a privileged spot where I can learn this while I'm on the job, or maybe my job will pay for it. They're not always accessible to those people that have no training and no education and have low resources to even pay for them.
The education have-nots.
Right. And many of them can be expensive. And at Lumina Foundation, we, at our core, we are focused on an equity imperative to ensure that we are closing these racial and ethnic gaps that exist. And so what we don't want to do is create a system that creates a larger gap. Now, I believe that some of these systems are working to reduce those gaps and find ways to make sure that this is more accessible to all people and everybody has access. But it's definitely something that at Lumina we're working closely with.
And so, I guess that's a tricky one, right, Theo? Because sometimes it's some people question whether even the premise of these, if someone is not already pretty well versed in going to college, say, have family members that went and understand the drill, are they going to be able to avail themselves of some of these online programs? Is it ever going to work for some of the education have-nots or the underserved populations? Right.
So we want to make sure. There's some great delivery methods that can reach many different people, and today it seems like there's something for everyone. We just want to make sure that everyone can access that. And so, you mentioned MOOCs. Part of the problem was it was the same delivery method. It was kind of lecturing at people and people didn't have access to it. And, it's free, but it really was not available to everybody. It was those people that already had degrees and whatnot. So edX is working on that and trying to make education much more accessible to everyone across the globe.
So do you, I guess you're saying there's that concern. I guess I'm curious about whether, what will success look like? You're just going to kind of monitor how these attempts go and see how that, whether it can work for a broader audience than just the ones, like you said, that you do fine anyway, no matter what the circumstance.
So at Lumina, we believe that all learning should count.
Right.
Everything you're learning, no matter where you learn it, you don't have to sit in a seat for, 15 hours a week to get credit for that learning. And so I do believe with the future of work and the future of learning that these opportunities will exist in many other ways. And so we need to continue to explore what else is out there. What we're talking about today may not exist even next week. There may be something new that's going to come out and kind of like shock the system. And we're absolutely open to that as long as it's high quality and it's focused on closing these equity gaps. So we don't want to reinforce anything or support anything that is not, it's going to be low quality, that's not going to help the learner and the individual, and further reinforce gaps.
It seems like an important piece of the puzzle for any of these new credentials is employers' acceptance.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing? Is there a growing acceptance of some of these new ideas like micro-credentials, or is that a continued challenge?
I think it's a continued challenge. I think there's more understanding of them. Employers have a lot of their own training, and so they understand their training and
they run their own training.
Absolutely. One of the things that we also work on at Lumina is transparency. So we want to ensure that all credentials have transparency, that you can kind of open the hood, look under the hood, and understand what it is, what somebody knows and are able to do. That's important for the learner. That's important for the provider, and that's absolutely important for the employer. No one should spend a lot of money getting a credential and not understand what it is and have an employer think it's meaningless. So absolutely, I'm working with employers to make sure that they understand this and that they value it, and it is something they're going to need in the future. What they need right now is important too, but there's no reason to get a credential that somebody needs right now, but they're not going to need it in a year or so. So we really need to think in the future, but also work closely with employers, with providers, with community members, and with students and families.
Well, we have a few questions, I think, out there in the audience. So I want to bring up a video question, and just takes a second for Scott, it looks like, Scott Tyler to join us. All right, Scott, thanks for your question. You're on.
I'm an adjunct lecturer at Lehman College.
So, 1 second, are you muted? Or let me unmute you. Okay, could you start again? Thank you.
Hi, I'm an adjunct lecturer at Lehman College. So my question is, I've noticed a lot with students, one of the things that's helping them a lot is they're all working on the same thing, so they're struggling together. How do you handle that gap? Because I find it's very difficult when you're doing these micro degrees or online courses even to have that connection with other people at the same time.
That's a great question, Scott. I do think that students are more likely to be successful when they have a support system. And so if a lot of these different providers have some sort of support system built in, the students may not see each other face to face ever, but there's something online where they're able to actually work together. Maybe it's on a project or something like that. So even if we are countries apart, we could still work on the same project together. There are also other mentoring opportunities that many of these providers have. And so there may be a faculty mentor, a staff mentor, or somebody that a student can reach out to, because you're absolutely right. Many students, especially today's students, what have traditionally been the non-traditional students, need those types of supports.
All right, thanks for your question, Scott. Appreciate it. And I think we have another text question. Do we have another? Okay. Apologies there. So juggling online systems is part of the challenge of any technology. So what do you see as, and maybe it's one of the things we've already talked about, but what is the biggest challenge in kind of getting to this new world of increasing the credentials and the credential getting of folks?
So I think there are so many out there right now that unpacking these and making them more transparent to everybody is essential. There's one thing that we are working on, or that we've worked on, called the Credential Engine.
Oh yeah.
Which is a new organization that is working to make credentials much more transparent. And so working online where you can put all the credentials that exist online somewhere, so you can understand what they are, where you could get them, what they mean, and then employers can see them. And so, your question was, what if you get these credentials and employers don't understand them? Well, this is a place employers could actually go and say, oh, I see what that credential means. I see what the learning outcomes are. A student could understand what sort of things that they want to learn and go see where these credentials could be provided. So really unpacking that and understanding what what credentials are is essential. The other thing about just getting credentials, I mean, there are many things that we work on: closing equity gaps, making sure that obtaining credentials are accessible to everybody. And so that includes affordability, geography, access, preparation, focusing on completion, making sure that when students get these credentials, we can actually understand that they're leading to good jobs and good lives, which helps us make sure that they're quality credentials. We don't want to spin out paper to people, having them spend a lot of time and money and get a credential that is completely meaningless to them, to their employer, and to society at the end of the day.
And another piece of the puzzle is obviously students and raising awareness. I was one of our earlier interviews, we talked with Dewal Shah, who kind of runs the Yelp of MOOCs, the Class Central directory, but even, he's steeped in this world of sort of students trying out these online courses. And he admits that a lot of people don't know what these are. You talk to somebody, on his cab ride over, or you just chat with somebody you meet on the street, and they don't know they might not at all have any idea there's a MicroMasters, or there's a, MOOC, or they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
How do you, is that something you all are working to address, or what is that piece of the puzzle for you?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think one of the biggest things we need to get over is that when most people think about college or a credential, they think about going somewhere for 4 years and it's brick buildings, and that's the only way you can get something beyond high school.
Right.
And that's not the reality anymore. Very few students actually live on campus for 4 years in a brick building. Many more students are married, they have children. Way too many students are below the poverty line, and they come from all sorts of race ethnicities, and they're all ages and types, and they're attending part-time and full-time, and they're employed. And so today's students don't represent at all who we all have in mind when we think about somebody getting a credential, a post-high school credential. And so increasing awareness for all of us that, there are these range of possibilities, that you can get a degree online, you can get a degree that it's both in residence, where you're somewhere going, sitting in a classroom, but also when you can do it online, or you could learn part of that on the job. So how do you combine all of these different competencies and show somebody, I have all these competencies, and these together can become some sort of credential? And so it's really opening up what is getting a credential these days, what should that mean, and having people embrace that more. And I think as the future of work continues to change, then the future of how you're going to be able to obtain competencies and then demonstrate the competencies is going to change tremendously. It will no longer be in a seat for hours at a time listening to somebody speak to you.
Yeah. It seems like there's a way in which, this idea of lifelong learning and keeping up with your skill set and being in dynamic jobs of the future, you could sit there and think, oh, that's exciting. Or you could also sit there and think, wow, that's going to put a lot more onus on, employees, and therefore like all of us that have jobs,
right,
to kind of, who pays is really one of the questions. I mean, even if it's low cost, are you seeing changes are you seeing a reduction in the amount employers are willing to help invest in some of these projects, or what are the trends there as far as a workplace being willing to help pay for some of these continuing education? Because it seems like it's going to fall on someone, right? If you have more education throughout your life.
Right. Great question. So I think there are a couple things. Obviously employers are trying to cut costs, and they may not think that training is important, and so that may be something that gets on the chopping block. But we actually ran a few ROI studies with a number of different large employers a couple of years ago, and found that those employers that offered training found that their employees retained longer, they had less sick time, they were much more productive. And so by providing training, it actually increased. So they actually saw a return on investment for the training, which was very positive for, I believe, all of the employers that we worked with. So I think that's important. I also think that training doesn't have to be some really formalized training where we all sit down and we go, we're training right now for the next 3 hours, and then we're going to be done training. I think we're all learning things on the job. However long you've been on the job, for a year, 6 years, or whatnot, it's constantly changing. So, Excel is not what it was 6 years ago. And so I'm learning different things on Excel. I'm not sitting down going, I'm going to learn this now. I'm just gaining those competencies as I use them. And so I don't think the lifelong learning has to be so formal where we're really sitting down and doing it. But I think we're going to have a mix of some of that we're just learning these things and gaining these competencies, whether we're aware of it or not. And then there are going to be some things where we have to say, there's a competency I really need to gain to stay in my current job, to be current, or to get that next job. And so there is going to need to be some things where I'm actually thinking about it and how am I going to gain those competencies. I also think that the market is opening up a lot more, and so these things are more accessible. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a high cost.
Have you taken any of these yourself? I wonder. I mean,
I have.
It sounds like you're teaching yourself Excel. That's good.
Yeah.
We should all do more of that.
Right.
I know I should.
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
All of the things that I have to work in all the time. I have not. I'm really interested in doing it. A few people at Lumina have attempted it, or to do some of these boot camps. We hear about boot camps all the time.
Sure.
And that's along this same vein. Now, boot camps can be really expensive, and most people that go to a boot camp have a credential already.
Yes.
But they're really they're great. People want people that have these skills that they learn at boot camps. But how long do we need boot camp? So it may be the shiny object right now, and in a couple of years it'll be something else. So it's kind of hard to guess, what is it going to be? What kind of training are we going to need? And I think just staying current and understanding it's okay. And when you talked about lifelong learning, I think even the vision that we have of lifelong learning that I think about is, my mom went to the college, and she was in the continuing ed class because she took a class in French because she was going to go visit France for a vacation.
Just curiosity, like reading a fun book or something.
Right. Sure. And that's great.
Sure.
And that should absolutely be, we should be learning those things. But I also think that's not what this is.
Right.
This is actually learning skills that you can apply on the job, not just for a vacation. I mean, for hobby is great too, but
you're
really
pro vacation, but this is a different issue. Okay.
Absolutely. And so looking at it as just something normal, and I think it's just going to begin to be in our DNA that we're constantly learning and acquiring these things.
Well, we're almost out of time, and if anybody has a final question, please, this is the time to chime in. But I was curious about the policy framework and the policy environment we're in. It's I think hard to tell these days. But do you see any changes in Washington in the Trump administration or the latest department? Are there feeling like there's more support, less support for a kind of things like there was the EQUIP program that was supporting some of these unusual innovative programs to help them apply for financial aid. I guess that's still going. But are you seeing any interest in this area or changes in the current administration?
Absolutely. So, we work at the local level, state level,
sure.
national level. And so we see a lot more interest in all kinds of credentials. Apprenticeships they come up quite a bit these days, but apprenticeships are built on all of these smaller credentials, on certificates and certifications and licenses that are all part of an apprenticeship. And so there's absolutely much more interest in these. Many states, we have 41 states in the US that have an attainment goal right now. It doesn't have to be the 60% by 2025 like Lumina's, but they also include certifications. Many of these states include certifications and certificates in their goals. States and actually the country and local communities recognize that their labor markets demand these type of credentials. And so they're putting more resources in those, more opportunities for their residents and their populations to obtain these types of credentials so that they can pull in more employees and then they can make sure that they have the labor market that these employees need.
Is there, in our last couple minutes, is there anything you've seen at this event or something interesting you sort of new and different you're excited about it? It doesn't even have to be credentials, but any or future.
Yeah, I think that this is absolutely a big topic right now. The future work is a big topic. The different types of credentials are a big topic. And what's exciting is that people are looking for new innovations on how to better deliver education. It's great to see that education doesn't have to be delivered in a classroom through a lecture. Back to the question about support, there are many different technologies that are being developed right now where we can talk online across countries and learn from each other, whether we're in a class together or something else where we're working on a project together. And that could be through our employer. It could be through an educational provider and whatnot. And there's so many people at this conference that are really focused on what does that learning look like? And how can we can change it? It's interesting. Last night, the last speaker was talking about, how far we've come. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind was he put up a clip from the Jetsons. And on this cartoon from the late 60s, for many of you that have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about the Jetsons.
They can YouTube it. Yeah.
Right, YouTube the Jetsons. And they predicted so many different things, robots and drones. And,
work looked a little boring, but okay, yeah, they had
right.
pushing the button. It was
right. But the thing that still looked the same was education. Leroy and Judy, whoever the children were, still went to a school that looked like, it was in the future, but it was still a brick building that children went to. And so it's interesting that we didn't think education was going to change, and now we're realizing it has to change, that sitting in a brick building is no longer the best way for most people to learn. We have to be much more diverse. And it's great to see so many people here at ASU GSV really taking on that challenge and trying to figure out, how can we better deliver education to many, many more.
It's a great image to close on. Maybe we'll fly in pneumatic tubes to get to our new classrooms in the future. Thank you so much, Courtney, for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.